The city had been dying for years. You could see it in the gray faces on the bus, in the smell of rot that rose from the gutters, in the flicker of neon signs that buzzed all night, because nobody could afford to fix them. Ethan Ward was 33 the day he realized the city wasn't dying anymore. It was already dead, and it was taking him with it. His job at the finance firm had disappeared after the layoffs. His girlfriend left a note that said only, "I can't breathe here," and even his therapist stopped returning calls. For months, he'd stared out the cracked window of his apartment at the streaming lines of headlights and thought, if I keep watching long enough, maybe I'll vanish into them. One morning in late November, he sold almost everything he owned, packed what was left into the trunk of a fading silver sedan, and drove north. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one left to tell. They say some people go to Alaska searching for freedom, others for silence. Ethan went because silence was the only thing he hadn't tried. The journey took 4 days through snow that fell in sheets, through gas stations where the air pumps froze solid, through stretches of highway where the radio gave nothing but static. The deeper he drove into the mountains, the more it felt like the world itself was dissolving behind him. When he reached Wrangell St. Elias, the largest wilderness in North America, the GPS signal vanished, and the road turned into packed snow. That's where he found it, a small log cabin tucked between the pines, its roof sagging under white smoke curling from a stone chimney like the last breath of something ancient. The listing had said it came with 3 acres of land and complete solitude. It had also said, almost as an afterthought, previous owner, deceased. Ethan didn't care. He stepped inside and was met by the smell of cedar and dust of wood smoke, and something faintly sweet. The place was small but warm, 1 room for sleeping and living, a wood stove. Shelves lined with old books, a window that framed the mountain peaks like a painting. For the first time in years, he felt a strange lightness in his chest. He strung a hammock across the corner and lay down, listening to the creak of the logs as the cabin settled around him. Outside, the snow whispered against the glass. He thought about all the noise he'd left behind, the sirens, the shouting, the endless hum of traffic, and he almost laughed. Up here, there were no deadlines, no bills, no people. Just him, the wind, and the kind of quiet that presses against your skin. As dusk fell, he stood by the window with a cup of instant coffee and watched the mountains turn gold, then red, then a deep bruised purple. For a moment, the northern lights shimmered faintly above the ridge, thin ribbons of green twisting like veins in the sky. He whispered to himself, "This is it. This is life." He didn't see the faint shadow that passed across the window behind him, the one that didn't move like wind or tree branch. He didn't notice the single set of footprints that appeared in the fresh snow outside, circling the cabin once before fading under the drifting flakes. Inside, Ethan lay back in his hammock, eyes closing to the slow crackle of the fire. The last thought before sleep claimed him was simple and pure. He finally felt safe. Outside, the forest exhaled, and somewhere beneath the frozen earth, something began to stir. The first few weeks passed in peace. Ethan fell into a rhythm, waking with the pale dawn, chopping wood, tending the small garden he'd planted near the tree line, and watching the sky bleed into color each evening before fading to black. He hunted rabbits, caught trout from the frozen stream, and learned how to let the quiet fill him instead of fear it. But solitude does strange things to the human mind. One evening, while searching for something to read, he noticed a black leather-bound book tucked between 2 worn paperbacks on the cabin's bookshelf. Its cover was cracked. No title, no author, no markings, just the faint smell of age and dust. Curious, he opened it. The pages were covered in elegant, cursive handwriting. The ink faded, but still legible. At the top of the first page, dated January 9th, 2015, were the words, "I don't know if I'm going crazy or not." Ethan frowned. It was a diary. The entry continued, "My therapist told me to start writing things down, said it might help me process the isolation. But it's not the isolation that's the problem. When I first moved into the cabin, it felt like paradise. I never thought I'd end up praying for the sun to rise. I never thought I'd hear it breathing under my bed." Ethan's fingers tightened around the book. The next lines were worse. The writer described hearing shuffling at night, seeing something in the dark, a man-shaped thing, with skin like old parchment, a spine twisted and breaking through the flesh eyes like rotten pits. "It moves wrong," the entry read, "like its bones are on backward. It watches me from the windows. It wants something from me. I can smell it even when I can't see it. A sweet, decaying smell like flowers left too long in water." Ethan closed the diary quickly. He sat there for a long time staring into the fireplace, trying to push the words out of his mind. It had to be a joke. A piece of fiction the last owner had written for fun. But there had been something too raw about the handwriting, too desperate. The kind of writing that comes from someone trying to hold on to their sanity one line at a time. He slid the diary back into the bookshelf and tried to focus on something else, anything else. He picked up a Philip K. Dick novel, but the words blurred. When he finally fell asleep that night, it wasn't restful. He dreamed of something moving behind the walls, of pale fingers scraping the wood from the inside. When he woke, the fire had burned low and the air was freezing. He sat up, listening. The cabin was silent except for the occasional creak of old timber. Then, faintly from beneath the floorboards, something exhaled. Ethan froze. He told himself it was the wind, the house settling, an animal, anything. But the sound came again, a slow, labored breath, like someone drowning under ice. He didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, he found footprints in the snow. Not his. Bare footprints pressed deep into the drifts, circling the cabin and leading toward the frozen lake below. The prints were small, human, but the stride was wrong, too long, as if the person had been walking on joints that didn't bend properly. He grabbed his shotgun and followed the trail a few yards down the slope before stopping. A figure was moving across the white expanse. For a moment, relief flooded him. It was just a man. He recognized the old snow parka, the rifle, the way the man walked. "Steve!" Ethan shouted, recognizing his nearest neighbor, a rugged man in his late 50s who lived about a mile away. Steve jumped, startled, then waved, trudging up the hill toward him. "Didn't expect to see you out here, kid." Ethan laughed nervously, lowering his shotgun. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd go for a walk. What about you?" "Just checking traps," Steve said, adjusting his rifle strap. "Animals are restless this time of year." "You look tired, though." "Everything all right?" Ethan hesitated. "Actually, did you know the guy who used to live in my cabin?" Steve's face darkened immediately. The warmth drained from his expression. "Will Lennox," he said quietly. "Yeah, everyone around here knew him. Why do you ask?" Ethan shifted uneasily. "I found something. A diary, I think. It's strange." Steve sighed, glancing toward the cabin. "You shouldn't have read that." "Why?" "Because he didn't die right. People say he shot himself, but that's not the whole story." They stood there in the cold, the wind whispering between them like something eavesdropping. Finally, Steve gestured toward the cabin. "Let's go inside. I'll tell you what I know." They sat at the small wooden table, a bottle of whiskey between them. Steve poured 2 shots, drained his in one swallow, and stared into the fire. "He was like you," Steve began, City guy. Thought he'd find peace up here. But something started messing with him. Said he was hearing voices, seeing a man with no skin. Thought it was cabin fever at first. Then he started digging. Big holes all around the property, even in the middle of blizzards. Said he was looking for something buried under the snow. Ethan felt his stomach twist. What did he find? Steve looked up slowly, his eyes cold. Nothing, except madness. I found him one morning sitting right there where you're sitting now. Shotgun under his chin. Blood on the walls. His wife vanished the same night. The fire popped, throwing sparks across the room. Ethan swallowed hard. The diary, it mentioned her. He said she kept disappearing, that she didn't remember leaving. Steve nodded grimly. That tracks. But here's the thing. The cops took that diary as evidence. So whatever you found, that's not supposed to exist anymore. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind rose howling through the trees like something alive. When Steve finally stood, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. If you're smart, you'll burn that book. Some things up here don't stay buried. That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what Steve had said. The diary sat on the shelf, silent and heavy, like it was waiting for him. Around midnight, he gave in. He lit the lantern, sat at the table, and turned to the final pages. The last entry was dated January 27, 2015. The ink was smeared with what looked like dried blood. I understand now, the handwriting said. The twisted man isn't the enemy. He's trying to lead me somewhere. He's trying to show me the truth. Tonight, I'll follow him into the woods. I think I'm ready. The wind outside rattled the window. Ethan closed the diary, his pulse quickening. Somewhere in the forest, a low moan drifted through the pines, long, thin, and human. The moaning sound faded into the wind, but it left something behind, a feeling that the forest itself was awake. Ethan sat there motionless, the diary closed beneath his palms, the fire flickering low and orange. Every instinct told him to burn the book, to pack his things, and leave before morning. But curiosity is its own kind of sickness, and isolation makes it worse. By dawn, he'd convinced himself it was nothing more than imagination. The wind could sound human in the right conditions. The forest could play tricks on tired minds. That's what Steve had said, wasn't it, cabin fever? Hallucinations. Simple. He made coffee, shoveled snow off the porch, tried to pretend things were normal. But the footprints in the snow hadn't melted overnight. They were still there, bare feet small, perfectly outlined, circling the cabin again. Ethan followed them halfway down the slope before they simply stopped vanishing into the untouched snow. No scuffle marks, no slide, no direction, just gone. When he looked back toward the cabin, he thought, for a moment he saw someone in the window, a pale shape standing perfectly still. But when he blinked, it was gone. That afternoon, he decided to hike to Steve's cabin again. He told himself he wanted company, maybe some whiskey, maybe reassurance that he wasn't losing his mind. But deep down, he wanted answers. The snow crunched under his boots, the trees looming like frozen sentinels. The further he walked, the quieter it became. Even the wind died down. When he finally reached Steve's clearing, smoke curled from the chimney. The warm, comforting smell of wood fire drifted through the air. Steve opened the door before Ethan could knock. "Back already," he said with a smirk. Ethan tried to laugh. "Guess I'm not as self-sufficient as I thought." Steve waved him in. "No shame in that. This place eats men alive if you give it half a chance." They sat at the table again, and Steve poured 2 drinks. The whiskey burned, but it calmed the shaking in Ethan's hands. "I read the rest of the diary," Ethan said quietly. Steve's smile faded. You shouldn't have done that. There's something in the woods." Ethan continued, his voice low. "Last night I heard it, like a person crying. And the footprints, they came back." Steve leaned back in his chair, eyes as arrowing. "You saw footprints?" "Yes, bare." Ethan nodded. Steve took a long drink. Then it started again. What has Steve's gaze shifted toward the window? "You ever heard of the Alaska Triangle?" Ethan nodded slowly. "You mentioned it before. It's not a myth," Steve said. "People disappear out here. Hunters, hikers, pilots, thousands of them. The government calls it wilderness accidents. Locals know better. There's something buried under these mountains, something that doesn't stay dead." Ethan frowned. "You sound like Will Lennox." "Maybe he wasn't crazy," Steve said. "Maybe he just saw it first." The room went quiet. The only sound was the pop of firewood and the faint whisper of wind against the walls. Ethan shifted uneasily. "You think this thing killed him?" Steve's eyes flicked up. "Killed him? Maybe. Or maybe it showed him something he couldn't live with." They didn't talk much after that. When Ethan left, the sun was already setting. The sky burned red as blood, and the shadows stretched long and thin across the snow. He made it halfway back before he realized he'd forgotten his gloves. He turned around, but Steve's cabin lights were gone. Not dimmed gone, as if someone had snuffed them out all at once. For a moment, he stood there in the snow, unsure if he'd taken a wrong turn. But then he saw it light flickering between the trees, not yellow like firelight, but pale and cold, like the reflection of the moon on water. It moved deeper into the woods. He should have turned around. He should have walked back to his cabin and locked the door. But something in that light pulled at him, a whisper in the back of his mind, urging him to follow. The deeper he went, the colder it became. The snow seemed untouched, pristine, except for a narrow path of prints leading ahead, bare feet, again small and delicate. He followed them into a clearing he'd never seen before. At the center was a frozen pond, its surface smooth and glassy under the moonlight. The footprints led right to the edge, then stopped. The ice was thin, there cracked in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. Beneath the surface, something moved. He knelt, breath fogging the air, and brushed away the snow. For a moment, the reflection staring back at him wasn't his. It was a man, gaunt, naked, with skin the color of wax, and eyes black as oil. Its mouth hung open in a silent scream, and its hands pressed against the underside of the ice. Ethan staggered back, heart hammering. The ice groaned, but didn't break. When he looked again, the figure was gone. Only his own reflection remained pale and shaking. He ran all the way home. By the time he slammed the cabin door shut and dropped the bar across it, his lungs burned. He sank to the floor, gasping, and tried to convince himself it hadn't been real. But when he looked at his boots, he froze. There were wet prints on the floor. Bare feet. Not his. They led from the door to the bookshelf, then stopped at the spot where the diary had been. Except now, the diary wasn't there. Ethan's throat went dry. He searched the shelves, the table under the bed. Nothing. The book had vanished. That night, he didn't sleep. Every sound made him flinch, the wind against the walls, the groan of the wood, the faint drip of melting snow from the roof. Around 3 a.m., he thought he heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate dragging. He didn't move. The footsteps stopped right outside the window. For a moment, silence. Then a whisper, so faint he almost missed it. "You see now." The voice was wrong, wet, broken like words, gurgling through mud. He wanted to look, but fear pinned him in place. The whisper came again, closer this time. you read what was mine. Something scraped against the window pane nails, or bone, or something worse. Ethan finally snapped. He lunged for the shotgun, flicked off the safety, and fired through the glass. The blast shattered the window, spraying snow and shards into the cabin. The echo faded into silence. Nothing moved outside. He stood there, trembling, staring into the darkness beyond the shattered frame. Then slowly, a shape rose from the snow. Tall, thin limbs bent at impossible angles. The twisted man. It turned its head toward him, and in the pale light of the moon, Ethan saw its face, or what was left of it. Empty sockets stared where eyes should have been, and its jaw hung loose black liquid, dripping from between jagged teeth. "Will," it gurgled, "you shouldn't have read it." Ethan stumbled backward, heart pounding. "I'm not." "Will," he shouted. The creature tilted its head, the motion slow and unnatural. "No, but you will be." The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. The last thing Ethan heard, before the darkness swallowed everything, was the sound of something wet crawling across the floorboards toward him. Ethan woke to silence. For a moment, he thought it was morning. The pale light filtering through the broken window looked like dawn. But when he glanced at the clock, it read 3:33 a.m. The same time the television in Will's diary had started to scream. His body ached, as if he'd been beaten. The shotgun lay beside him empty. Snow had blown in through the shattered glass, dusting the floor with a thin layer of white. His breath came out in clouds. The fire was dead. He sat up slowly, scanning the room. The twisted man was gone. The only evidence of its presence was a trail of wet prints leading from the window to the center of the room, prints that stopped abruptly, as if whoever left them had simply vanished. His mind raced. Maybe he'd hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe Steve was right. It was just isolation and exhaustion, nothing more. But then he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. The diary was back. It sat neatly on the kitchen table, open to a new page. The ink was still wet. He approached slowly, every step crunching through the frost that had formed across the floorboards. The handwriting wasn't the elegant cursive from before. It was jagged, rushed, carved into the paper like someone had written it with shaking hands. "You saw him. You know now. The forest keeps its dead Ethan. It keeps us all." He slammed the book shut, heart hammering. He needed to get out. Grabbing his coat, he stumbled into the freezing dark. The snow was falling harder now, a white curtain that swallowed the trees. He could barely see 5 feet ahead, but he knew the path to Steve's cabin by instinct. He followed it blindly, head down the wind clawing at his face. Halfway there, he saw the light again, the same pale glow he'd followed the night before, flickering between the pines, like a lantern swaying in the hands of something tall. He should have turned away. But he didn't. The light moved deeper into the forest, and this time he heard voices with it. Soft, broken voices whispering his name. Some were male, some female, one that sounded disturbingly like his own. He reached a clearing and froze. The snow was gone, here melted in a perfect circle. In the center stood a crude wooden cross, half buried in the frozen soil. Around it, dozens of small mounds dotted the ground like graves. Ethan's stomach lurched. The air smelled faintly of rot beneath the cold. Something moved beside the cross. A figure rising from the snow. Its body limp, its skin gray and stretched thin over bone. The same hollow eyes, the same twisted